Robert F. Kennedy tweeted this out. He said, I just saw this video by Border Hawks News. The crisis at the border is unsustainable, he says. Our communities are slashing education funding to accommodate illegal migrants. We've seen a record number of gotaways since Biden took office. I would say you have to close the border. That would be the first thing you do. You have to, if you know, I think Trump actually said if you can't control your border, you don't have a country. I mean, right. Imagine if that was the border between Palestine and Israel. Did you think they would fucking stand for that?
Welcome to What's Left, a weekly political discussion challenging the mainstream left. I'm Eduardo Barca with co-host, teacher and socialist Sandra Lipson, and socialist Kenny Cepeda. We're online at what'sleftpodcast.com. You can find that link to our site in the blog or in the episode notes, excuse me. You can also find our personal social media handle as, for mine, at Don Eduardo Barca on Instagram. And please subscribe, rate, review, turn on your notifications, and share your favorite episode wherever you found this episode. Thank you. All right, so we're back, us again. We've been have ongoing discussions about, and that is on open borders, but in response to some of the people that I think we've thought of, maybe within our circle, maybe you two more so than me, because I know both of you listen to Jimmy Dore, and so we'll be doing a kind of a response to his recent episode. Titled "Liberals Have No Answer for Border Crisis," where he is critical of open borders policies or open borders in general. And so that's what we'll be doing. Kenny or Andy, do you have anything more to add?
Yeah. Let's see. First, I told you I was going to bring this up when I talked to Brandy about what we're going to be talking about, responding to a Jimmy Dore episode where he talks about the so-called open border policies of liberals, and complains about that and draws the conclusion that we actually have to defend the border and protect the border and put some kind of wall up. She was like, "Are you guys going to talk about this again?" And I realized that, yeah, we are going to talk about it. And it made me think about Alison McDowell. I know that, she had really wanted us to get more involved in the Web3 discussions and to do the deep dive research in what's going on digitally and in tech and things like that, and more than that. She's just going on into some really interesting areas. But I am interested in that, but I'm more interested in being educated about that than pursuing that stuff myself in many ways. Although ed tech, I think, is important. But this question of borders and open borders and the idea of how do we respond to workers from other countries in terms of what we do when they come into our country or leave a country, I just feel is critical for those of us who want a different world to get right. And if we don't get it right, then we are going to be ultimately divided as workers internationally. And if that happens, then I think we have no hope for revolution, in my opinion. And so I do feel like, for me, this is an issue I'm very passionate about, because I do see the people who I've been organizing with and people fighting for freedom really, in my opinion, getting this question wrong. I don't judge them for it. I don't say, "Oh, you're dumb." They're not dumb. These people educated me about a lot of things. But I think they're wrong on this question, and I think it's important that we not be wrong on it, because it gets down to fundamentally, which side are you going to be on? Are you going to be on the side of other workers across the border, or are you going to side with your own state? And if we do that, we're lost. So this is an issue I think I want to talk about every time it comes up for me. And when I saw a person who I respect, in terms of what he's put out there and how he's changed, Jimmy Dore and some of his guests. He's had some good guests, and even the guests he had on this particular episode from Due Dissidence, I think are pretty good. Like they've come to the right conclusions, I think, about at least in opposing COVID measures, and are opposed to the war in Ukraine, didn't fall for that, didn't fall for Russiagate. So these are people who I've aligned with, and I think all of them historically have come from the left. And yet I find that myself really diverging from them on the positions or the conclusions they're drawing, even though some of the things they say I would actually agree with. I just feel like they're drawing completely wrong conclusions. So for me, this is really important to go through. And when I saw that Jimmy Dore was doing an episode where I really disagreed with it, I thought it might be good for us to talk about it and see what you all made of some of the things that were said by him and the two people from Due Dissidents. I don't want to not forget their names because they deserve to be known. Let me get this right. Hold on. Yeah, the two people from Due Dissidents are Keaton Weiss and Russell Dabular, I think his last name is pronounced. So those will be some people that we're going to show some clips. I think you might see them, and those are the people who are put this episode together.
I guess I wanted to add, that this question, right, of immigration, at least in the time that I've been politically conscious, comes up again and again, and for me, it's not an accident that we're talking about it right now, a year to go to the elections. And, immigration doesn't stop, woes don't stop people, we'll talk about it. But I do think it's important to have these conversations because I do think that there is a failure of articulating, why we have to be about open borders, not in a moralizing way, right? Which is often what is the leftist position. In saying the left is also a very broad stroke, right? Like now, not especially now, just by these people who you just mentioned, right? Like I don't know where they would fall, but because in some ways they are sounding more as what we or typically consider right wing in some of the conclusions, even though, and so that's why it is confusing listening to this conversation. That their analysis in some ways are spot on that I agree with, but again, then we revert to falling for the apparatus of the state that we find suspicious, that we need to fight, right? And that is an instrument of, and they say it themselves. So, but I do think that that's why I want to be part of this conversation, to try to kind of sort that out, because, I want to make it clear. I don't think they're, bad people. I don't think they're stupid. I think they have opinions that are, and we need to be in conversation and be honest and genuine about, our opinions. And without canceling each other out, right? Because they do bring that up in the conversation. I think that's important. But at the same time, it's like, I agree with you, Lipson, that we have to understand this, beyond like maybe like mainstream positions. We talked about, right, like religion and Marxism. I've been critical of the religions of liberalism and just repeating certain things without fully understanding the issue. And seeing that in some ways, the right wing, quote unquote right wing in this binary, they have reasons why they're saying certain things. It's just that it all gets manipulated. And I think that's what's happened to these people that we're going to talk about, that, we think we have an understanding, but the conclusion shows that at best we control opposition.
I just want to just quickly add that there's so many angles to look at this. We've explored different angles. There's an economic issue, there's a humanitarian issue, there's a love, personal issue around it. There are so many angles to look around it, and I think we can maybe we will discuss a more stronger economic angle here. I'm not sure. Maybe both of you will, but I know that Jimmy Dore, in listening to the episode, thank you both for sharing, and I know both of you watch this consistently. I'm not as constantly as tuned to his episodes and on his channel and or podcast, but I looked at it immediately. I thought, my goodness, the things he is saying to me sound outrageous about certain things, and I don't really think Biden has open border policies, but we'll go into that further. So let's respond to it. Let's have a response. People who listen to What's Left listen to Jimmy Dore as well. So I think this is a interesting topic for our audience as well, because it's something that, where do they fall? we've seen a split after the lockdowns. So we'll see where it takes us.
And I would say we're going to show clips. We've each picked some clips that we thought might be good to respond to, but people should watch the entire episode, which I'll put the link to the entire episode, because they actually cover a lot of different material. They cover a lot of different things. So it really would be worth listening to the whole thing and see what you make of it. Because here we're just going to do our best to point at some of the things that we think where we might agree, but then areas obviously where some of us disagree. And then it'll be curious to see where Kenny and Eduardo and I agree or disagree. We'll see. So Eduardo, you had an initial clip you want to see, right?
Yeah, let's begin with the beginning.
So that's the United States government allowing this to happen. And believe me, they're only doing it for the best of intentions. I mean, there's no way on earth this would be happening. The United States government would just be letting this happen to destabilize our economy and add to a prevailing sense that we need more authority to clamp down on all of us. There's no way. If that's what you think, then you've got to stop going to your news. You've got to stop getting your news from me. You got to stop going to your big news networks. Here's a little bit more of it, by the way.
This huge caravan of around 300 migrants crossed into Eagle Pass thanks to Border Patrol agents lifting the barbed wire.
That's really happening. So let me bring in the fellas. What do you make of this? Oh, it seems like at the same time that Joe Biden is trying to finish. It seems like he's kind of superficially trying to finish Trump's border wall. At the same time, there's obviously an open border policy, right? What do you make of this?
Okay.
Well, so my response to that is, so Jimmy Dore is talking about an actual physical wall, right? He's talking about Trump's physical wall. And that's laughable, right? Like nothing's going to prevent anybody from trying to cross over. And I think both Democrats and Republicans have strengthened the border over time. If you look at what some of the recent episodes we've discussed on how even recent changes have been made to the border with geofencing, there's a lot of technology at the border, some of the most high-tech technology, as well as a lot of, I mentioned in the other episode, which we'll link, which we talked about, how much there is scanning and fingerprinting and documenting and recording of people to monitor their movements in the US in the USA, right? And it's a very dangerous track because it's not like you need a physical border. There's a lot of deterrence already. Even the USA using other countries, such as my country in Mexico, and even using countries now in Panama and other closing options for people to migrate up north. So it's not just a physical border that's going to. It's not just. This is not what is going to prevent people. There's a lot of prevention already, and there's a lot of high tech that's already there to prevent people. I'm not entirely convinced myself that Biden is interested in having an influx of people enter the country with open borders. And maybe I should pause with even the way that we define open borders, right? I think people we have discussed with may have a different concept of what open borders is. Open borders to some people might seem like policies making it easier for people to migrate over to another country. So some people that might consider themselves to be open border folk might just agree with still scanning people and having them essentially have passports to be legally in the country. I think the three of us, as we've discussed open borders, because I remember the conversations we've had on What's Left, are very clear that none of that is necessary. Even for us US American citizens, a driver's license shouldn't be necessary, for example. A passport shouldn't be necessary for us, right? We shouldn't have any restriction of movement, or as I see it here in Colombia, where if you don't have a permit as a Venezuelan to be here in this country, such as my roommate who doesn't have who has a permit now, but didn't for the first year being here, the first 2 years, I think it was, you couldn't get a job. You couldn't even get on the bus. You couldn't have there's not a lot of ways that you can move yourself around. You can live in the country, but essentially you're being forced to live in a way that is very low economically in your home, like might just be one room where you're exploited, right? And for us who are in the USA, like these are there's even I think our driver's license are getting more improved now. There's now becoming, I think there was a scanning of our faces now. I thought DMV is something that they're doing now, where they're trying to amp up the way that we move about and to make technology easier for data to be recorded. So that's not what we're discussing here on What's Left. If there's a thumbs up here, right? What we're discussing on What's Left as Open Borders are do away with papers, whether U.S. American, whether you are Venezuelan, whether you're Mexican, whether you're Guatemalan, whether you are Central American, whether you are South American, whether you're Muslim, whether you are wherever you're from, there shouldn't be any way to follow people and essentially vigilante policies that are just trying to keep people in line. And so when I hear Jimmy Dore discuss open border policy, or he is saying that Biden is for open borders, I think that's a blanket statement. A lot of Republicans, conservatives say this. I'm not saying Democrats don't. I'll get to that. But it's just like saying that Biden is for open borders. I don't agree. So I'm not convinced we're on the same page about this. It's not like, that's not how I think of it as open borders. So I don't see any. I see both Democrats and Republicans doing a lot more. And I can mention a few examples. Just yesterday, I was listening to the news that there's new changes with Ukraine, the debate on Ukraine, trying to get more money for Ukraine. And in that, well, Democrats and Republicans have come to agreements where there are concessions, where there's going to be $100 billion trying to be sent over for support for Israel, for the Ukraine, and for, I think it was Taiwan, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
In exchange for what? In exchange for proposed mandatory detention for migrants who would be allowed to make a case for asylum. Anybody who is touching U.S. American soil, not that I agree with these policies, but I'm just saying how these things work. Anybody who touches U.S. American soil has a right to seek asylum. What happens after now is being proposed. There is now an expansion of detention centers where they're going to be kept in. That's what is now being discussed, where people are going to be kept in. Whereas my Venezuelan friends will touch U.S. American soil, they have the right to seek asylum, but then they would just be released into the U.S. American territory, and then they would be called in for a court case in which they would figure out if they were approved for asylum. Now there are changes. You might not be released. You might just stay in those detention centers until you have your case being seen by a judge in court. Those are now those changes. Another thing, more deportations. Before, in the case of Venezuelans, because I'm very aware since I'm here in Colombia, by the way, if no one knew this by now, for Venezuelans, if you're going to, if you were deported, you were deported. It was hard for them to be deported because Venezuela was not receiving them. Now Venezuela is receiving deportations because of negotiations with Venezuela. So now even Venezuelans are being deported back to the home country. So these are new changes that are happening, and it's fast-track deportation process that's currently limited to the border region. Now, this is like not just we're discussing that, but I want to discuss also just one bit. Like there are $330 billion in the past 20 years on agencies that do border enforcement. There's a lot. I don't see that as open borders. I see that as both Democrat and Biden and Trump and even, Obama, I meant to say, Obama, Trump, and Biden policies. Like even before that, like we're talking about 20 years of $330 billion being allocated to the border for border enforcement. And that's still even, I'll just say, it's not even preventing people from crossing. So when people are criticizing Biden, I just don't think Biden nor Trump nor Republican nor Democrat are for open borders. So I think that's why I'm saying I don't know what Jimmy Dore means by that. Now there is a part where we'll see later on where there's a clip, or actually he says it in this one clip, where it's to destabilize the economy. And maybe any of you can discuss further on that. But I just wanted to mention that because even just yesterday in the news, there are changes right now because there are negotiations for more money to Ukraine, right? And so I'm just seeing more of Title 42 pandemic policies that were supposed to be having ended in May, continuing, where now you can be expelled and you don't have any reason, you just can expel them, which wasn't the case before the lockdowns, before the pandemic. So I'll leave it there. I don't know if anyone, if you want to make a statement or a comment to that clip.
I just wanted to add to some of the things that you mentioned. Being in the community in San Francisco around immigration, this is literally what we did. We helped people who were seeking asylum, that were, allowed into the country, quote unquote, right? Like physically, right? That's one thing. But there are borders that follow these people, right? Like you can be physically in this space, but this is not different than the vaccine passport thing that happened during COVID, because a lot of these people come into the country and their cases took like a year and a half to be heard. In that period, they're not allowed to work legally. Not all of them. Some people do. Some people get an exemption, but very few do. So most people have to find housing, have to find, a way to make a living, a way to support themselves, while not breaking the law, because if they get caught working, they get penalized, and their case is negatively impacted. And so, again, these borders don't go away. People might get allowed, and then that doesn't mean that their case will be accepted. They can be sent back home. I'm not gonna say that everyone is being persecuted. A great number of people are, suffering, threats and stuff. A lot of people are also economic migrants, which seems to be sometimes like separated for some reason. Like some people think that one person is worth more than the other, to be allowed to move. But again, just to make the point that a lot of these people do not, the borders don't leave them, when they're waiting to be processed through the system. And, and I think this is something important that we'll address later with other parts of, this conversation. The other thing is that, I think this is also in Jimmy's analysis, right? That the destabilization, this is where I begin to start having, a pause, because it's like, whoa, Jimmy, like you in the past, you've talked about how people have misplaced anger, misplaced, responsibility of destabilizing the economy. Like, what are we talking about? Like, are we talking about the fucking, masses of money that were printed during COVID? Who is destabilizing this economy, really? And I think we'll get more into it later, but these are questions that I think are glossed over. Like you said, Eduardo, they're just like blanket statements, that really don't analyze the situation, and misplace, and exaggerate an issue, right? Because but to begin with, this whole episode is about, on Jimmy Dore, it's about an immigration, quote unquote, crisis, right? And yes, there's people coming to the border. I'm not denying that. The size of it and the crisis of it, I question that, because this is not the first time. Like they also mentioned NAFTA in this here, right? Later on, we'll get into it. But the point is, there have been multiple waves of people that have come, and we cannot talk about this wave without COVID. We cannot talk about this wave with other shit, that has been destabilized their countries, which they also address, but I think they do it poorly. They connect the dots poorly. But that's what I want to say for now. This part of the clip.
Yeah.
Can I just mention one thing? Just a fact. It's not long. It's just wanted to say a correction. I wanted to add that the $100 billion that are being proposed for funding for Israel and Taiwan and further militarization of the U.S. border. So it's that as well. Sorry, I just wanted to add that because I mentioned it. Thank you.
Okay. Well, so I do want to highlight what you first said, which is what an actual open border policy is. An open border policy, the one that I call myself an open border person, would mean no border. Like, in the same way, I've said this before, in the same way that I moved from San Francisco to Oakland and got a job in I had a job in San Francisco. Then later I got a job in Oakland. I lived in San Francisco. Then I moved and I started living in Oakland. I didn't need a passport to do that. I didn't need anybody's permission. No one checked me at the at the bridge that crosses that to make sure I'm allowed to do that in Oakland. That experience should be what workers across the world have as they move anywhere in the world, because I believe workers should be free. And I believe that freedom for workers is essential to the notion of a revolutionary world, of a world that can be different and that can break up the kind of world we live in right now. And I do believe Jimmy Dore, I believe the people from Due Dissidence actually would call themselves probably revolutionaries of some sort. Certainly, Keaton Weiss mentioned capitalism and was anti-capitalist. Jimmy Dore has talked about being anti-capitalist. So if you are against capitalism, then you have to be for, I do believe you have to be for the freedom of workers to move anywhere they want and they'll ultimately organize with each other. That's the solution, rather than separate each other. And they mentioned that. They mentioned how these price policies are divisive. But I personally believe they fall in part for the divide. But it's not just open border because we need working class internationalism. It's also open border because any border that's placed there, any restriction that's placed there is going to accrue and in favor of the state that controls us right now. And that's what we have right now. We like you said, Eduardo, there's no open border from the Democrats and Republicans. They have different ideas of how workers' movements will be controlled. Not that big of a difference, but slight differences. And so anytime you call for putting up a wall, or for even monitoring a border, or for monitoring workers' movements, you are empowering the state, the same state that I know Jimmy Dore says, I'm pretty sure he hates, and wants to dismantle. So his position is contradictory. You can't call for the building of a border because the building of a border is going to be monitored by a state, and it's going to be monitored by a state to attack workers on one end or the other. And this gets me to the question of destabilizing the economy. I'm not sure I would say it's destabilizing the economy, but I do think there's accuracy in this part. That I do think that the capitalist class in the United States has been worried about what's happening to wage pressure from the difficulties of finding workers. And in fact, they're also finding difficulties in putting people in their military. And I know that I have heard actually that there is a program within the military to get more people, the idea of getting your papers from joining the U.S. military. So in the same way that the U.S. ruling class will use people who are from other countries, so-called illegal immigrants who haven't come here legally via some kind of process. And again, that legally means the state tells you where you can go. Those people are going to be encouraged to either go to the military or, find a low-wage job, or find a job that right now capitalists are struggling to find, to being able to pay U.S. workers a wage that they want to pay them, which is a lower wage. So I do think he's right in saying the capitalists, and maybe he's even thinking the Democratic Party are using. I don't think it's the Democrats. I think the capitalist class uses the border is not there to keep workers out. The border in part is there to define who we are all penned in. Those citizens, we're all penned in here and are told, oh, this is our country. This is a country that's good for us, to build nationalism for us, to make us think that our state is our friend. That's number one. But it's basically a prison for us that we can get exploited within that prison. But it's not quite a prison in this regard. That border is important to the capitalists because they actually want to control the flow of workers in any direction. So sometimes they're going to keep workers out, and under certain economic conditions, they're going to keep workers out, and they're going to monitor that wall more tightly, or not. Other times they're going to let them in. Ronald Reagan basically had a guest worker program and then gave amnesty to all those guest workers back in the 80s. I can't remember exactly what the reason was for, but I'm sure it was for the needs of capital at the time in terms of laborers and things like that. So that what he's misunderstanding is that this border wall was never meant to protect workers. It's meant to basically allow the capitalists to control the flow of workers. It's meant to keep us in prison, to keep us down, to make sure we are monitored one way or the other. And so anytime you say about building a wall, you're handing over your freedom to the state that has no interest in preserving or protecting those freedoms. So that's what I would say about that. He's probably, there might be something to that destabilization thing, but that's the reason a border exists. It exists to allow capitalists to control the flow of workers either way. So to tell the capitalists then, oh, please build a wall, you're basically handing over your freedoms to them. And that nothing good will come of that, as he knows, I think.
I think that if anything, the influx of labor that might be, that is allowed in, it actually stabilizes for the capitalist class, the ability to exploit workers, like you said, because if you read the Wall Street Journal, they've been talking for months and maybe over a year about, the strong labor market and that as a bad thing, for the capitalists, and so, and also I wanted to add that the border as we know it today, it hasn't existed. It really started taking shape in the 90s with NAFTA, as economic liberalization took root in Mexico with Gortari, and Mexico was paraded as the the symbol of globalization, in the future and the promise of capitalism as the Soviet Union collapsed. And so Clinton started taking, building walls and making it harder on people, as well as they attacked, social services for people here in this country. They went after, Social Security benefits, for unemployed people. They actually started squeezing mothers, and asked for mothers to go to work, if they wanted any sort of benefits. And they started criminalizing people. So all this was worked in concert. This is also when Biden was introducing those bills to criminalize people. And that the world that we live today started taking more shape in that period, and they knew it, and they started building the walls. And today it's just a continuation. And what we're talking about today is, to me, is a, it's once again, this is coming up once again. This is not, to me, is not new. It is has different stakes because we live in a more technological world, and I think the borders are going to take other shapes. But again, just to say that this is not new. This is not also old. Before the 90s, the U.S. border was a revolving door. People could come and go, and people didn't want to stay here. Mexican workers didn't want to. They would come here, work for a while, and then go home. But when they closed the borders, they basically said, "Oh, you have to choose. You either you stay or you go, because otherwise you're going to die on the crossing."
Oh, Eduardo, you want to final comment? Then
I just want to add the fact that I'm a child of parents that were granted amnesty. Both my parents are U.S. American citizens, and they had to. It was in 1986 where Reagan, as you mentioned, gave amnesty to undocumented immigrants, and it was very hard because if you did something, you had a record or something, because not all of my family members who applied received it because of something they did when they were an adolescent, or if they had a mark on their record, or if they, anything that they did that was irredeemable, you were not allowed to have amnesty. But about 3 million people were granted amnesty by Reagan, a conservative, and it was good for, as you said, it was good for the economy. At the same time, it wasn't as good for a lot of undocumented workers, because if you came after 1986, you were undocumented, and there were stricter sanctions on employers. So that's why, even as Kenny knows, because I've shared this with Kenny, and even he knows just on his own experience with working with undocumented workers, that if you try to apply for a job, you need to have permits, you need to have a social security number, you need to have all kinds of paper legalities, like you need to have a bunch of things. All of that came out of the amnesty as well, because it was one thing, to give amnesty, was another thing to crack down on employers. Now it's not about employers. It falls onto workers. If you're not having the right paperwork, then you're going to be punished for it. Anyhow, that's all I want to add to that.
And I guess a question I have, and maybe we can add something I just started thinking about, how does this connect to the 90s? Where they started clamping down, because this is a preamble to a further and further clamping down in a more intense war on workers on all sides, because that is when the American jobs that started leaving the country accelerated, right? Like, and this is a beef that quote unquote right wingers have, and there is validity to that. It's just that, again, who is really your enemy here?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. No, I don't have an answer to that, but I believe you're probably right that there's a continuation between the Reagan policies Reagan had in the 80s to what Clinton does in the 90s. But I don't know what that is. Kenny, do you want to tell us what you think we should look at?
Can I mention one more thing? I'm so sorry. Can I mention one more thing? This whole idea of giving some workers legality to be in the country versus other workers, it's just like, even I feel, with my parents and then people coming after 1986, it puts workers against workers.
Yeah.
I have seen some of my family members who have been given amnesty criticize undocumented immigrants because they didn't do it the right way or the legal way. I mean, that's the same thing with Cubans. Recently, they were taken off. They could be here. I'm saying here like I'm in the USA, but I'm in Colombia. But they could be in the USA for a year. Cubans can be in the USA for a year, and they're given residency. They're given some sort of legality to be in the country over other immigrants like Mexicans, Venezuelans, and Guatemalans. You're not given that kind of right. So it just pits other workers against other workers, where they should be given. Everyone should just have no one should be undocumented. Everyone should just be working or doing as they please and continuing. But this whole idea of some people get something or other people is just, yeah.
So the next clip I have, and I think it's gonna transition smoothly, 640 to 846. So it's a little longer, but so okay. 640 to 846.
And here in New York City, you may have heard, they just announced budget cuts because they're sending immigrants here. And we have a shelter law that anyone who needs shelter must be provided shelter by law. So as they send these immigrants here, they can't be left on the street. So they're having to rent all of these hotel rooms. And the effect of this is that a lot of people who are veterans who need housing are not able to get these services because they're going to migrants. Now, this is not in any way to say bad migrants. In the end, it's always the same story. It's the owners and the capitalist class pitting desperate people against each other for scraps while they ride off with the money. But the left needs to find a position that is not anyone who's against this is a racist. That is not a position. And frankly, whether sure, it's politically convenient. I consider sending the migrants to northern cities one of the most brilliant political trolls in history. And I say that as a New Yorker because, sure, people love to sit in these non-border cities, these very blue non-border cities, and say, look at these racists. Look at these racists complaining about people coming over the border. The second they started to send them to places like New York, Chicago, D.C., we can't handle all of these migrants. Now, if somebody in El Paso said that, you'd call them a racist, right?
Yep.
And they've been saying this for decades.
I've seen African Americans, people of color in Chicago, my home city. I've seen videos of them screaming at their aldermen, their elected city councilmen, saying, where the hell are you getting all this money for these immigrants when we've been wanting you to do something for us for years? You've done shit for us, and all of a sudden you pull money out of your ass to help these people who aren't even citizens here, you motherfuckers. And they've got a case. They've got 100% good case, and it just goes to show you that the people, again, the billionaire class that is running this country wants chaos. They want that.
Right.
They want you pitted against immigrants. They want immigrants pitted against people of color. They want workers against workers. They want you to think your enemy is your neighbor and not the enemy that is creating the conditions that make those migrants desperate enough to come here. And then second enough that that are the oligarchs that keep the border open.
That's a long clip, but I want to start with the whole New York situation, right? And what was the name of the guy who was speaking? I'm sorry.
Russ Dobular, I think.
Okay, so Russ, he's talking about how budget cuts, right? Like this is happening in a lot of cities. There's budget quote unquote deficits. San Francisco also announced a 10% budget cut that was ordered by London Breed, who happens to almost make $400,000. She's the top paid mayor in the country, or at least the San Francisco mayor was some years ago, and I wouldn't be surprised if they still are. So again, she's proposing a 10% budget cut, and again, but Russ is saying that immigrants. I don't know if he believes that, or I don't know if he's saying that's the argument, but that these budget cuts are due to the influx of immigrants. And again, I'm talking from my experience, from what I know. We've had a bunch of people seeking refuge in San Francisco when I was there organizing, helping that specific community. Because again, borders do not abandon them. Getting housing, getting a job, going to school, all these things are really hard. Because they're not allowed to do so. So they're allowed to exist here without having access to the basic necessities of life, and it's nearly impossible. They're living in squalid conditions. And the city actually did that. I don't know New York, but my guess is that Russ is overstating how much immigrants are taking resources, right? Because that is the beef, and I think that's often what gets highlighted, right? Like that immigrants are taking something. Immigrants are not taking shit. Like, if for anything, we're talking about crumbs. Like, we're talking about. We're not talking about Ukraine, right? The money that's going there, or not even there, really. Like transferring to the weapons manufacturing people here, or the investors in these companies. We're not talking about the military budget that just got approved. Right, we're not talking about the salary of the mayor of San Francisco. We're talking about immigrants who might get housing that is temporary. If some refugee gets access to a program, it's temporary. It's not a permanent thing. And then Russ goes on to equate the lack of housing for veterans, people who got tricked into going to fight and steal and rob and rape, in the name of liberty, but in reality, they're in democracy, quote unquote, protecting our country. They got fucked up in the head. Because my guess is, if you're a veteran who needs housing, is because you're fucked up, in some way, and you were left out of the cracks, and the government you fought for is not fucking taking care of you, and it's not immigrants taking that shit. It's not immigrants. And again, this is where that pinning that they're talking about, which is ironic, right? Like they're talking about how immigrants get pinned against other people. But they're adopting this same analogy, these same arguments that are absurd. The conversation shouldn't be about these crimes. It should be about, why are we still giving Israel so much, money? Why are we still, where is all our tax money, going? Why are we getting taxed so much? Why do I have to continue to give my hard-earned money? Why do I get taxed on the money that I earn? Then I get taxed on what I buy, and on and on and on and on, and so again, there's some misplaced anger, and this argument is really short. It falls super short. Like veterans are not on the streets because immigrants are here. Veterans are on the streets because they're just replaceable. They don't give a shit about them. Like they're people that were just used as pawns and cannon fodder, and put in a meat grinder, and brainwash, some of them. So there's some believers, but whatever. The point is that I think that's an irresponsible thing to do, in a way where I hope that they can see that, their argument is not logical, really, to me.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree that the idea that the same empire that fucked up its own so-called own citizens through the war, and there's so much homelessness among a major part of the homeless population are veterans of wars of empire, are their victims of this empire, of the state, of the U.S. state. And they also talk about this, how many of the people who are migrating from those countries of Ecuador and Guatemala and Venezuela are themselves victim of that same empire. So the soldier that's sent to kill those people over there are victims of this empire. And then the people who actually, countries are destroyed and economies are destroyed by that same empire are also victims of this empire. And to think that I think they're just misidentifying the problem. They're falling, and it is strange because it's literally in the very same sentence they say immigrants are being divided against native workers and things like that, and yet they do that. They engage in that actual division and let off the hook the built-in austerity, like this austerity that states are finding themselves in, that cities are finding themselves in. It's not an accident. That's been built in. It's built in to allow corporations to come in, and it's built in the same way that structural adjustments are used in South America to force money to go into Western banks, so that, and then to build austerity in those countries to then allow a cheap labor force. Our cities are being structurally adjusted in the same way. So this is part of a policy of built-in poverty and increased impoverishment. Now, I want to be clear. I no longer, and I think I used to believe we would fight to have the state, get some part of those state coffers. I don't believe that anymore. Like, I'm not interested in a rebuilt state that can pay for workers what they need, or immigrants what they need. I don't believe in that. I think we need a revolution to get anything that's like justice. So I don't bother with that. But in that logic, that the people who are playing us and playing immigrants and playing native workers, it's not immigrants making this problem at all. It is literally fighting over the crumbs, and that's kind of what they're engaging in. And secondly, I mean, again, I'd have to go back to some of these numbers, but I remember seeing some things in California that basically, because illegal immigrants, paid sales tax on everything, they actually, the belief was that actually they paid way more into the system as a group than they took out of it in terms of ensemble. And this idea of the immigrant who's just getting over on people is the same thing as what Reagan was talking about when they said the welfare queen who's getting over on people, and like all these people on welfare getting over. It's the same. It is the same lie that is used to justify the state allowing people to become more and more in misery, and more poor, and then using this divide to deflect from who's really responsible. The area I do agree with him on is the hypocrisy of liberals. Liberals aren't for open borders, and at the same time, they're going to accuse Democrat or Republicans of racism when they themselves have the very same racism. Like, I don't know if I would say racism fuels the desire of either conservatives to have, when they say they want to build a wall, or when liberals say, well, we want an orderly queue, allowing the state to control that. I do believe racism plays a role in all this, because the idea that 300 people crossing under a gate can be some sort of giant like invasion. Race features into that, or some notion of a different kind of people who are coming in, a different kind of culture, and they're going to take our culture. I believe that kind of idea animates some of the thoughts of the people who are on the show. Would I call that racism? Maybe. I don't know. I would just say it's a kind of, I think nativism is another term for that, but it's just, I would just say it's not internationalism. And the thing I agree with that the Russell guy is liberals are hypocrites, and they will accuse other people of racism, and then and they do have a very shallow critique of this because they're not for open borders. I think we can talk about our differences with Jimmy Dore and Keaton and Russell without even using the word racism, because I don't think their views are animated by racism. I think their views are inconsistent, and I believe they've spoken as not wanting to strengthen the state, but unfortunately they're taking a position that is going to do exactly that and weaken the prospects for workers. And I guess the last thing I would say is that all the examples Jimmy Dore cites are literally examples that show just how useful these policies are in dividing various oppressed groups, particularly the fact that he mentioned blacks in Chicago who were howling at their politicians who were elected to do something about these immigrants. Like, literally, that's a case study in divide and rule. Although I think Jimmy Dore would acknowledge that. It's just, unfortunately, I think he's literally coming up with a conclusion that will only make that division bigger. Eduardo?
Both have covered it really well. I mean, that was my clip too. I'll just say it's the economic system, as you both have alluded to. It's not, there should be housing for all, not just housing for immigrants. There should be housing for people who are living here already. And everyone should be having an equal piece. I mean, that's how we should think of this. Everyone should be supporting us. I don't think that money should be allocated to one group or another, as people are saying, or as people are being tricked to believe. I just think that we should all be. Everyone should have those resources. Yeah.
And, just think back to our episode of the census. This is another reason why the census,
yeah.
And just wanted to comment on, because they brought up identity politics, right? And I think they're trying to wrestle, like we are, I think, about identity politics, and they have like a healthy what do you call suspicion of but I don't think it's of identity politics, because I mean that what that does is like that simplifies and polarizes any arguments when you call anybody a racist, and sadly among the liberal circles that I was around, whether it would be like a small business person who was woke, a community organizer who was woke, they all share this, simplification of, those fucking racists. When they themselves are engaging in a lot of racist shit. Like, I saw that working in the restaurant industry. This automatic implication that immigrants are worth less than a native worker, regardless of their ability to work. And don't tell me that's fucking not racist. Like, they're calling someone at the border who's seen a bunch of people crossing, like, just simply racist, when, like, I think Russ makes that argument later, but it can be understandable, right? Like, it's shocking to certain people, and that is, again, captured by the Republicans, right? And made into this fucking game of tossing immigrants to each other, in order to add fuel to this fucking binary, and like, oh, you deal with it, and then the people who feel attacked in some way, like at the borders maybe, but see, the Trump-like people, right, speaking and showing up for them when everyone else, is talking shit. You're racist. You fucking racist. When, again, I think they talk about it in the show, or somewhere else, whatever. The point is that the biggest number of poor people in America is white. It's not black. In proportions, we could talk about different things. But again, fucking statistics, right? You can show anything you want. But the biggest number of poor people in America is white. And what do liberals have for them? Fuck you. You fucking racist. So where the fuck are they going to go? This is, something, there is no political space for them. There is not even a conversation for them. There is only contempt. There is the attitude of Hillary Clinton, right? Calling them deplorables. And it's crazy because, then you get so-called radicals like fucking, what was that dude? Jon Stewart, right? Licking, and Jimmy Dore talks about that. He calls it a tongue bath, that he gave to Hillary Clinton and Condoleezza Rice, right? Two powerful women, a black and a white woman, fucking, Secretary of States, ambassadors of fucking death, right? And again, but he is the woke, the reasonable, the civil, that's the other thing, right? Like, that is implicit in identity politics, and and using that rhetoric that you're educated, that you're civilized, that that you're progressive, and everyone else who does not speak this fucking language is a backwards, racist piece of shit, deplorable. And so I agree that they're trying. We have to account for that, and this is why, right? Like a lot of people on the left or whatever liberals, they are unable to understand why someone like Trump was able to, have the appeal that he does, and he's still fucking there, right? Like regardless, because again, when you're getting screwed up just like everyone else, but you have no political, so much about representation, right? There's no one speaking on your behalf, but there's someone who maybe says some shit that is outlandish, but it's different. Oh, this guy makes more sense. Like this guy is not speaking in a condescending tone to me. This guy is not thinking that I'm stupid. This guy might be for me, or at the very least break this shit up. And so that's what I read, but it's impossible, right? That this is where we get Russiagate, and every fucking educated person that I talked to was unable to even have a conversation about that, and so on and so on, and COVID vaccine and any topic really. And so I do see this effort, right, in Russell and these people having this conversation that identity policy is a massive issue that contributes to this dynamic that we have going on.
Yeah. Let me go to this. I think this will be our last clip, and I hope I'm hoping this is the one I can do, because I think it'll start to speak to what I hope are some solutions other than building walls.
Wages, because there's been strikes. There's been lots of wildcat strikes. There's been a union that got formed on Staten Island at Amazon. They don't want that shit happening. Right. We just had a union win for the UAW. They can't have this. They can't abide by this. And so that's why that border is wide open. And if you don't think that's why the border is wide open, you're a chump and a sucker of the billionaire class, and you're being manipulated by professional managerial class language of racism, and you're mean to immigrants. The meanest thing to immigrant is that the United States policy creates these people who are desperate enough to come here, right? So maybe if we stopped overthrowing their fucking governments and we stopped implementing the drug war, maybe they wouldn't want to come here and they wouldn't be so desperate in the first place. By the way, NAFTA cut the legs out from underneath rural farmers in Mexico. And turned it over to big agribusiness, right? So these are the policies of the billionaire class that is creating this crisis. And then, of course, you turn on your neighbor, you turn on someone lower on the economic ladder than you, like an immigrant,
right?
Because I think he brought up UAW, and I think what you heard in that are a lot of things we would agree with in terms of the divide and rule. Those are the things. But he brought up UAW, and he brought up the fact that these workers are being brought in to scuttle a labor movement that might be developing. He's right. That's what the capitalists will do. That's why the border exists. If labor gets its act together, which I still believe that labor movement is in a desperate condition, and I think I will not even know if I would call the UAW thing a victory in the way that people are talking about it, because I think it agreed to several concessions that I think are going to allow the continued automation of that industry that are going to ruin auto workers in the long run. And in saying that, I want to say two things. First off, when we talk about workers losing jobs in this country, it's not immigrants taking your job. Most of the jobs we talk about are being taken by robots. Most of them are being taken by automation. And that's all about data collection. That's all about technology. That's all about continuing to support the capitalist efficiency process. When you talk about losses of workers at work in the docks, in all major manufacturing, you're just talking about when you talk about the job losses in those, the vast majority of job losses are not because an illegal immigrant came in and took that person's job. Those jobs are decimated because of automation and because of technology. And then the few workers who are there, they got to work harder. And then the other people lose jobs and they have to find something else, something smaller scale, put together various part-time gig things. And that's even more on the horizon when you look at these robots being built that are going to be replacing Amazon workers in places. And already you can see robots swimming around all over Amazon warehouses. And it's going to be part of the process that they're going to replace teachers. So if you were worried about somebody taking your job, you wouldn't worry about an immigrant. You would worry about technology. You would worry about the digital world. You would worry about AI, and you would be stopping it. That is the future that is going to dismantle the world for all of us. It is literally not an immigrant. To think that an immigrant is taking your job is literally missing the point. But if you did have immigrants being brought to take down your union, there's a long history of those sorts of things being done, of Irish workers being brought in or Black workers being brought in. The answer to that, we already have the answer to that. You unionize those folks. You organize with them. The labor movement in this country was built by immigrants, was made by immigrants. In fact, part of the anti-immigrant laws were to attack the people who were organizing those initial labor movements. If you go back to the Haymarket Martyrs and the Haymarket riots, most of those people were immigrants. And so this labor movement was built by immigrants. It will continue to be fed with immigrants who want to fight for a different kind of world, just like Native workers do. The answer to how you fight bosses using other workers trying to take your thing apart is to meet those other workers, greet those other workers, and organize those other workers. That's it. If you try to find an answer that means keep those folks out while I keep mine, then your boss is strengthened. There's no way that you can't find an answer that way that does not strengthen your boss or weaken you, because for the working class, there's only one answer, which is we must come together across national boundaries that exist, ultimately take down those national boundaries, remove them, and just have a world run by an international working class who are free to move anywhere they damn well please. So I think I wanted to bring that up for that reason, because his mention of the UAW, and I'm not sure that's the right clip, but I think at least it highlights how much they get right and yet come to, in my opinion, such desperately wrong conclusions.
So right now I work in an industrial setting. It's a poultry processing plant, and this is my first job in industrial setting. And firsthand, that's why I think about this statement, right? The immigrants are taking someone's job, and that is, to me, from my vantage point, an absurdity, right? Because Russ, in some point, he makes a very fucking weird argument where he talks about students, workers with student visas taking his job, his former job, and that's what he bases his analysis of immigrants taking a job. And by default, a student with a student, a worker with a student visa is not an undocumented worker, and so. But my point is that, so I work in a poultry processing plant. The plant has had difficulty getting workers because it's a big plant, so they're regulated by you have to have legal workers, quote unquote legal. So we have difficulty filling positions. What did they do? The most difficult position to fill is the sanitation, the ones who clean the plant. At night, like they work, from midnight to like 8 a.m., like the graveyard shift. Why did they do? They outsource, so it's no longer done by the company, but it was outsourced to, a contractor who hires, undocumented immigrants from Honduras, Guatemala, in order to fill this position, because otherwise they couldn't fill it up, So there are shitty jobs out there, there are shitty jobs, and so immigrants are an integral part of the capitalist economy, and they know it, and they play all these games while, advancing this rhetoric that someone is taking your job. I'm not saying that, there is, that some jobs went to Mexico, for example, or blah, blah, blah. But again, it's not the immigrant doesn't come with that intention to take your job. They just want to work, and it is, the capitalist who decides, how do we use these people? How do we, put them in the system? So they're accounted for. That's my point. It's not an accidental thing, and we have to have that in mind. And like you said, Lipson, I think that's important. Like our job is to welcome these workers and tell them, don't get cheated by these fuckers. Because if you get cheated, we all get cheated. And we're part of the same team, not because we'll forget about you, just because you're doing the shitty job, or because in the long run everyone gets fucked.
I mean, we're in the time of elections. This is always going to be used. Who is the boogie person? So to gather support from a certain class of people, you're going to cater to or going to say things that make or deflect the system that we live in, the capitalist system that we have, and to ignite and to provoke working class folk, in this case, poor US Americans that feel that the system has been unfair to them, but they don't know, or maybe they're just tricked, just tricked to believe that over there, what's happening over there, it's the COVID, or it's the immigrants, or they're the ones taking your job away, and it's the blacks with their drug use over there, even though opioids are prevailing a lot within very conservative states and mostly white people, it's like saying it's not drug use, or so it's always trying to deflect and find the boogie person of who is taking away or your right to live the American dream. And so in this country, right? Like, so when I see this, I hope people can really hear the way that the way that during these elections people are trying to that politicians try to manipulate and to sway people one way or another. So whether elections mean anything and your vote means anything, it's the grouping and the separation of workers against others, right? That's what I see here. And I hope people are aware of that now. So that's my comment to that, because this is an old trick in the politician's book.
Just wanted to add, that this trick worked on people that, we thought, right, like had it or are pretty close to what we think, but the trick is working on them, right? Just like we talked about this, right? Like the people who we thought were about freedom in anti-capitalists are suddenly being trapped into the apparatus and supporting the apparatus that we're supposed to be fighting. And again, like it just shows that it's an ongoing battle, right? And that anyone can be fooled. Like I'm not saying they're stupid or they're bad people, right? Like, and this is why we talk about this, right? This is what we have to be honest and true, and like, no, like I don't fucking agree with that shit. And instead of just canceling each other out. And I hope that somehow they're able to recapacitate and rethink shit, because I don't think this is just a Jimmy Dore or Russell or the other guy thing, because I've been seeing that process happening in liberal cities, like of anti-immigrant, like like, oh shit, this is where we're going right now, and in that process is not unrelated to the shit that we were fighting during COVID, right? The tracking, the geofencing, that you're supposed to be there. And again, that story of the people that I've encountered, looking for refuge in San Francisco, in the Bay Area, it's not a story. That's why I don't talk about just moralizing about someone else. This is a story that is coming close to home, because we're talking about geofencing of everyone and deciding whether you belong somewhere or you're allowed to do something or you're not. In a world where, I invite people to read Fabio Vighi. There is more articles that he's produced. The capitalist economy is going through a transition, and it has to have these safety measures to protect the system in place, to deal with the immiseration that is going to come. And like, again, fucking AI just came into the picture, right, for the masses. And and we don't yet know the depths of disruption that's going to cause. And you think you're a fucking professional? You think your intellectual labor is going to fucking save you? I would invite you to think about it.
Yeah. And what I've appreciated about Jimmy Dore and people like Kim Iverson is I've seen them become more radical in the last few years. I've seen them, embrace the conspiracy theories that I rejected myself many years ago, and they are now coming to look at 9/11 and COVID and things maybe haven't come to the full conclusions that I have, but they're moving in that direction. And I do think that Jimmy Dore has said we need a revolution. You can't have, in my opinion, we will not have a revolution and keep borders. We will not have a revolution and allow the state to continue to tell workers where they can go. And that's what borders are really about. There will need to be open borders, not the bullshit liberal open borders. They're not open borders, like Eduardo said, but the end to national borders for workers. And in the same way that capitalists have in the past, although they're not going to do that as much now because we're seeing them competition more, allowed the free flow of capital across those borders, but not allowed workers to do it. No, working class revolution means workers can move anywhere they damn well please, anywhere. And that's a revolutionary world that I think Jimmy Dore, I would think, would want. You're not going to get there by calling for borders, and you're not going to get to police those borders. Those borders are going to be policed by the state, and they're going to be armed by the state, and they're going to be technologically supported by the state, and all that technology they use at the border is going to be used at home and on native workers. I think that I'm also thinking this is where, and I don't know if this is a chicken or egg thing. I do see, again, this is where RFK Jr.'s positions and his running has weakened our side. We are falling again for politics of division. I mean, the guy is good on some things, I suppose, but man, his running, I think, has really created a lot of confusion for people on some political questions. And I know Jimmy Dore can't stand his RFK Jr.'s position on Israel and Palestine, but I think he's kind of falling for it here on the border stuff.
But again, and that's the funny part, because his position on Palestine is an indication of his position on managing people. And again, and RFK, to me represents this binary, really, reform or revolution. He's not a fucking revolutionary.
Yeah.
And so falling behind some fucking messiah, goddamn it, I thought we learned it with Bernie Sanders, right? And Obama and, and other people. And so here we are again, right? Like at the outside of the maze again.
Yeah.
I'm glad you brought up RFK Jr. Yeah. And speaking of AI, and also what we wish we would have is, like, Florida, for my friend Jake, who thinks that Florida is a free state. They're one of the very first states, to launch the smart IDs. And that's to replace driver licenses. So that's the future we're heading into. So when we speak about open borders, when we speak about the freedom of movement, speaking about it for all of us, right? Like,
yeah,
not just in the area of immigration, it goes beyond that.
Yeah.
So anyhow, all right. Well, I think this is a good place for us to wrap up, and I appreciate this conversation with you both. Thank you for sharing the Jimmy Dore episode. I'm not a consistent listener, but I appreciate anything that is being sent to me. I'll listen to it as I'm doing chores and getting updated. Right. That does.
And Eduardo, I should have said it earlier, I'm just glad to have you back. It's nice. It's always nice to see you return to our episodes, because it makes everything feel more like home again. So I know that you're going to be still mostly here, but sometimes out. But I look forward to the day where I can know every week you're going to be here, because I definitely.
Thank you. Yeah. I look forward to being on What's Left when I can with the both of you, and I know that it's always a challenge here because I don't know. My week always changes, and I'm working here. So,
Yep.
All right. So, I think I'm not sure when I'll be back from Colombia, but I've been here since October, and I'm spending the winter here and the festivities. So we'll see what happens. I'm a little homesick. I wish during this time I'd usually go back to my home country, Mexico. But I'm here in Colombia for the moment. That does it for this week's episode. What's Left is a weekly political podcast / channel challenging the mainstream left. We post information about our topics and our guests on the episode notes. Wherever you found this episode or on our blog at what'sleftpodcast.com, you can find past episodes to this podcast / channel there and connect with us. I remind folks, if you fancy anything you've heard here, please subscribe, rate, review, turn on your notifications to any of our platforms on Spotify, iTunes Podcast, Google Play, BitChute, Odyssey, YouTube, Rumble, or Telegram. You can find our blog and any of those links in the episode notes wherever you found this episode. Excuse me. If you would like to give us feedback about something you've heard or suggest something for us to cover, contact us through our blog and we'll respond to you. Mostly Andy will. Thank you so much for doing that, Andy. I'm Eduardo Barca with co-host Kenny Cepeda and Andy Lipson, and we look forward to having you on and tune in next time. Ciao.